Jeff Songster will be presenting today on Crab Survival 101, Steps to Take During and After a Natural Disaster. Jeff currently resides in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with his husband and biggest crab supporter, Josh, and 2 golden retrievers, Owen and Betty. He currently serves as the Senior Manager of Customer Experience at Spot and Tango. In his free time, you can find Jeff visiting the many theme parks across the country and even the world, planning his next cruise, or watching the many hermit crab videos on YouTube. Jeff has been an avid hermit crab advocate since 2004, when he received his first land hermit crab from his 7th grade science teacher. Since his days with 2 crabs and a 10-gallon tank, he is now an adopter for the Land Hermit Crab Owner Society, where he houses 18 crabs of 3 different species in his 300-gallon build, all of which have been adopted from other crab parents. Jeff also proudly assists with the CrabCon giveaways and Land Hermit Crab Owner Society Calendar Crab of the Month. Being located in South Florida, Jeff knows all too well about the importance of planning for natural disasters such as hurricanes. He's an advocate of planning for the worst but hoping for the best, and hopes that you will take the proper steps to ensure that your crabs are prepared in the unlikely event of an emergency. Please welcome Jeff Songster.
Hello everyone, and welcome to CrabCon 2023. I hope everyone is enjoying their first day here at CrabCon, and very much looking forward to today's talk. So on today's talk, we are going to talk about Crab Survival 101, Steps to Take Before and During a Natural Disaster. One theme that you're going to hear throughout today's presentation is really planning for the worst, hope for the best, right? It's always important that we have a plan. So let's talk about what that plan might look like. So when we are talking about disasters, it's really important to think about what disasters are possible for me. What are likely disasters based on where I live, right? That's going to be the biggest factor is where you actually reside. So some of the disasters that we're going to talk about are things like floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, blizzards and ice storms, and of course, everyone is susceptible to power outages. Your power outage is just going to look a little different based on where you're located. So these disasters are, some of them you can plan for, right, in advance. Things like hurricanes, we sometimes will get a lot of notice. Me being in Florida, we pay very close attention during hurricane season on what's coming to us. And then there's other things on this list like tornadoes and earthquakes that are a little bit more random and much more difficult to predict. However, it is good to know if your area has a season where this is more likely to occur, so that way you can have your stock ready to go before it does happen. So always be aware. Before we get into it, I do want to put out there a quick safety message. And remember, this is very similar to when you're on an airplane and they're giving you the speech of make sure that you take care of your own mask before putting on and assisting other masks of other passengers. Remember that you are the most important. You and your family are the most important part of you. So if there is a disaster and it happens very suddenly, the most important thing you can do is make sure that you and your family are safe and that you're not putting yourself in any additional danger or any additional risk. This talk today is really focused on preparing for a disaster, and that is really the key to success. So just going to read off this little safety reminder that safety during a disaster is almost the important part. You must take care of yourself and ensure that you are not putting yourself or your family in any additional danger. This is why preparation and a plan are the key to success here. So, when looking at different disasters, what is going to be really helpful is, does the disaster of where you are living, does it have a season or a time of year that it is more likely going to occur? Flash floods and flooding can be quite random, but of course, they typically are caused by the spring and summer rains that happen. The Atlantic hurricane season. So those of us that are in Florida, the Texas area, and of course all along the eastern coast of the United States, we should be very familiar that that runs June 1st through November 30th. And then the Pacific hurricane season starts a couple weeks earlier, starting on May 15th and also running through November 30th. Earthquakes can be quite random, but sometimes they're triggered by rain, which I thought was very interesting. It just makes the ground a little bit unsettled. Tornadoes, again, can be quite random and very sudden, but they do have a bit of a season, and they tend to happen end of spring through the early fall. And of course, if you are in that area of the United States that gets tornadoes, then you're definitely going to want to think about how can you quickly make sure that you are prepared for that disaster. And then something, thankfully, I don't have to deal with too often being in Florida are blizzards and ice storms, which of course happen during the winter in the colder areas of the country. However, last year we had some really crazy weather throughout the United States, and even in Texas, they were experiencing record low temperatures that their power system just could not handle, and it took many people's power off for a significant portion of time, and they were left without power and had to evacuate in some situations. So, always being prepared. Again, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Now, when we start thinking about disasters and what we're going to do, it's very easy to spiral down the what ifs and what will I do if dot dot dot. It's something that I do myself in most every life situation, and especially when the care of my hermit crabs are involved. So, what is really important is to take a step back and remember that one, having a plan is the best thing that we can do. Be prepared for the disaster and then follow through with that plan to keep everyone safe. So, it's important to just take a step back and remember the basics. Hermit crabs are a tropical species that need heat and humidity to live and thrive. They should have a temperature of around 80 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity of 80% humidity for them to breathe. They have to have access to salt and fresh water at all times, must have a food source, keep it protein focused, and to keep them happy and healthy. I like to keep some spare shells on hand in the event that you have to evacuate. And remember, be realistic. The crabs are going to be stressed. They're going to be taken out of an environment that they're familiar with, and they're going to be put into this very different environment, especially if you are evacuating. And providing them things to comfortably hide that they can go into, reward them with some of their favorite treats will actually be really, really helpful for them. So, what do you do before this disaster happens? Having a plan established on what family member is going to be responsible for your pet's needs, who's going to get the water, food, disaster kit ready to go. Where is the safe place that you can go to in the event that an evacuation is actually necessary? Could it be a family's house, a friend's home, a pet friendly hotel, or is there temporary housing that you could put your pet into a boarding facility? Typically, that's not an option with hermit crabs, but occasionally it can be done. So definitely check with the different areas and resources that are around and available to you. If you do have to evacuate, such as like a very, very strong hurricane is coming through and your house is going to be compromised, I would plan multiple routes for evacuation. Living in South Florida and having to evacuate a couple of times for different storms, sometimes different routes are blocked and then you kind of just get stuck. So plan multiple routes for your evacuation in the event that you do have to evacuate. And it's a really good idea to review that evacuation plan, double check your emergency supplies on a monthly basis to ensure that you haven't forgotten anything, that you haven't had anything expire in that time. Make sure you're checking your expiration dates for your crab food or for your own personal food, of course, too. And I would do that on a monthly basis and just make sure that everything is still good to go. If you do have to evacuate, it's always best to do it as early as you can. Getting out is much, much easier. And please don't forget to take your pet's emergency disaster kit. In the next portion of this talk, we are going to go through what I currently have in my hermit crab disaster kit and how I can take it easily on the go with me. I like to say keep at least 3 days of supplies, but ideally 7 to 10 days worth of supplies would be best. Of course, you're going to want food, water, prime to condition the water that you have. If you do have spare shells, that's great. And then food and water bowls to make sure that you are able to feed and water them. And then, of course, having the disaster kit and carrier ready. So we have a special closet in our home that we use for this disaster kit and for the evacuation tub that we have for our hermit crabs as well. And I think it's just really important that everyone in your house know where that is and what it's used for, and then also agree on when are we going to use this? At what point do we actually decide to go ahead and evacuate and take the hermit crabs with us? So let's build a disaster kit, shall we? Some of the I want to say ingredients, but that's not right. Some of the materials that you're going to need are a large plastic tub, a couple of water jugs for fresh and salt water, some prime water conditioner, dried foods, hot hands, emergency heat blankets, spare sand and eco earth, and then spare shells as well. This is a great time to shout out our different vendors that are Lycos approved. So places like Just Two Old Crabs from Trisha, south of the ocean, Kelly, Crab Cuisine Company from Carrie, and MT Pet Emporium. I would list them all, but that would take all day. Those are just some that you can really stock up on some food that are very much focused to the protein, the fats, and the different nutritional requirements that our crabs need. So that way they can still eat in the event that you do have to evacuate, and they can eat what they need to be happy and healthy crabs along the way. So let's go build that disaster kit, shall we?
All right, we are going to go ahead and look at how to make a first aid kit, or an emergency kit rather, for your hermit crabs. So I have brought out my trusty emergency kit for my hermit crabs. So I live in South Florida, which is very susceptible to hurricanes, especially this time of year. So yours might look a little bit different based on the weather conditions of your area and exactly what you need to include. But this will be a really good foundation of what you should be thinking about as you are building your hermit crab disaster readiness kit. So it's been a while since I've opened this, so let's see what I have got inside. All right, so as you probably are very aware, your hermit crabs do need water. Let's put this lid down here. So I always include 2 jugs of this water, and I have one labeled F for fresh and one labeled S for salt, so I know which ones are which and I don't have to remember. So labeling is super important there. I keep a lot of extra things in here. So throughout the year, I'll buy these cuddle bones. So this is a great option to have in your emergency kit. Out of water, I think the most important thing to talk about would be food. And I have a lot of options here. So let's go through things one by one. So I throw a lot of things in here. And let's see, I have some moss and lichen, just in case if I do have to evacuate for any reason, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, how I would actually evacuate my crabs out. But I do have this prepared with enough food and water for them to evacuate for a week or two, should we get a really bad hurricane that actually threatens the safety and the integrity of my house. And so I have some moss and lichens that are dried that I can rehydrate with some primed water along the way. I also have these little coconut things that work perfect for little bowls, so you don't have to get super fancy. I do have some regular bowls, but also just have some decor items that would absolutely work. And speaking of, I do actually have some extra bowls that I don't keep in my crab habitat throughout the year, and I keep those in here as well, just so I always know where they are. And again, I could just grab this if I had to evacuate for any reason and run out the door and know that I have the supplies that I need to keep my crabs happy and healthy for a week or two. One of Mary's clay bowls here. This is what I would probably put green sand or worm castings in. Some more bowls, some other food that I have here. And I do keep this is from south of the ocean, some dried food, bunny poo in here. What's really great is throughout CrabCon, you guys are going to get a ton of samples. And the samples are just the perfect size to keep in your disaster kit, because it's very much on the go and you can it's just a very small amount that you would need over the next 1 to 2 weeks. So little tip there, put some of your samples in there. And then if you don't use them by the time that your disaster season is over, then you can just give it to your crabs like normal. Now, if you're ever in a situation where it's very unexpected that you have to evacuate, and maybe you need to get somewhere first and then you can actually order some supplies, always support our members that are in the Lycos community as much as we can. Places like Just Two Old Crabs, Crab Cuisine Company, South of the Ocean, MT Pet Emporium. Love to order from them and keep a good stock. You can see I actually have a whole box of Just Two Old Crab stuff that I keep here all the time, just in case I do need to evacuate for any reason. But in the event that you get somewhere and you need to just get food very quickly, Chewy is a really great option. They have 2-day shipping pretty much everywhere anymore. And they have a lot of these single ingredient proteins. And I think that these are actually made for cats, hence the logo. But this has 1 ingredient, salmon. I have this one that I think is packaged for dogs, and it's by Stella and Chewy's, and it is just 100% beef liver. And then this one is 100% chicken breast. So protein is super important to your crabs. Single ingredient protein options from Chewy will do just fine in the event of an emergency. I have some more foraging items here. Of course, I keep a bottle of Prime in here for the water. Some more bowls. What else do I have in here? Oh, this is tuna. My crabs actually go nuts for this. I just opened it because it's not expired yet, but I think it will expire before hurricane season is up. And they go nuts for this dried tuna. They absolutely love it. I have some of Kelly's South of the Ocean Better Than Leaf Litter in here as well. I keep that just in case. And then the last thing that I keep in my evacuation or disaster kit is a box of shells. That way, again, I don't have to go through the tank and find every single spare shell that I have. I know that I have a box full of shells that will fit the majority of my crabs. I would say probably not the most important thing to keep and think about in the time of emergency, but I have a couple of crabs that are very picky if they don't have a selection of shells, and they'll start going after each other. So I've learned the hard way that I need to make sure that I always have an assortment of shells to keep with my crabs. As I've mentioned before, your disaster kit will probably look a little different than this. I'm in South Florida. The #1 disaster or emergency that we're likely to face are hurricanes and having to evacuate. And so that's why my disaster kit looks a little like this. I don't typically have to worry about things like heat or humidity because those things just kind of naturally exist where I am located. But if you did live in an area where you might get a blizzard or an ice storm, you're going to really want to think about what are those materials that you're going to want to keep in here. Some things that I would recommend keeping in your disaster kit ahead of time are things like hot hands to keep your tanks warm. You could wrap them in a washcloth and put them right in the tank. That would be totally fine. You could also purchase a hot plate that runs off of propane. You obviously need to make sure that you're keeping propane in the emergency kit as well. And that way you could boil water, and you could put the boiling water in a water bottle. The water bottle goes in the tank and warms it up. You would definitely want to think about this ahead of time. And if you're a minor, make sure you get your parents' approval. And if you're a parent, just make sure that you know the risks that are involved. But I have heard of a couple of different crabbers heating up their room by using candles with terracotta pots placed over them that could heat up the room and keep the crabs warm. Emergency blanket is something that I would absolutely keep in this if I was in a place that I would potentially risk losing power in a cold environment. And they're actually quite affordable on Amazon. They're not that expensive at all. Just type in emergency blanket and you can tape it right to the tank and keep all of the heat and humidity inside of it rather than losing all of that heat during a period of without power and being in that cold environment. This is what I have kept in my disaster kit over the last few years, and I have started to experiment a little bit with keeping some of my own, or starting to stock some of my own materials as well. So this year was the first year that I dried some food ahead of time, and you can see I have things like just 100% dried spinach, bell pepper, I have banana, sweet potato, papaya, I think more banana is in here as well. I think I have things like edamame, kale, blueberries, and sweet potato. And I just have dehydrated it, kept it in these little Ziploc baggies, and keep it ready to go. Super easy to toss into the disaster kit. And then your crabs, again, if you have the need to evacuate, you have all of this food ready to go and you don't even have to think about it. Just grab your box, out the door you go, and you're good to go. Speaking of an evacuation, so you're definitely going to want to keep a disaster kit whether or not you're planning to evacuate, to make sure that you have the necessities to keep your crabs happy and healthy in the event of any disaster. If you lose power for a couple of days, if there's a natural emergency that's going to keep you from getting mail or from being able to go out to the grocery store, etc. And the most difficult part, I think, of this talk and making recommendations is, at what point do you decide that you need to evacuate, and do you take your crabs with you? I think that that is going to be a very personal choice, and you know your crabs better than anyone else, and you will have to determine what is best in your situation. All of those disasters are going to vary pretty vastly from each other, and it's really up to you to make the best decision for your crabs. And even though it is the most difficult one, it's something that you will have to decide on your own. I do have an evacuation plan for my crabs, so I'm going to show you what I use here. So this is my giant Tupperware that I would take in the event that my hermit crabs needed to evacuate if we were going to be gone for more than a week or two because of a hurricane, or if we knew that there's some severe flooding that would put our apartment at risk. This is what would come with us. And what I would recommend doing is filling this up just about an inch or two of substrate. You don't need a whole lot, just an inch or two would be fine. And place your crabs in here, give them some hides. Basically think of what you would do for PPDS, but don't actually use PPDS. But think of a similar type of environment. It's very simple, but you can definitely give them the hides. You're gonna want the perfect conditions, or as close to perfect as you can get, 80 degrees temperature, 80% humidity, and try to maintain that in here as well. I also keep a spare heat mat with me as well. This is what would come with me. That would go on the back. I actually have two of these so that it fits along the entire side. That would plug in and be able to make sure that this stays nice and warm for my crabs. And again, I think you really have to make the best decision for your crabs. I think the most difficult decision is especially going to be on if you think you have a crab that is molting, what are you going to do with them? I think you need to weigh the risk versus reward in that situation and really decide how long are you going to be gone. And if I leave for an extended period of time, is there a chance that that crab would suffer? And if the answer is yes, then it is probably worth it to go ahead and dig them up in this situation in effort to evacuate and keep them safe. Now, in those situations, you definitely want to keep those crabs separated from the rest of the colony. I would use like a smaller Tupperware, poke a few holes into it, keep them separate, especially if they have molted recently and they're still soft. And then they can still go, I would probably do a second one of these Tupperwares to keep them separate so the other crabs don't smell them. And that's how I would evacuate a molter. Again, I think my brain would lean towards if I knew I was going to be gone for more than a week and I knew that the conditions were really not optimal for a crab. So probably a little bit shorter for those of you who are in up north and maybe you're having a power outage during the winter. Anything under 72 degrees Fahrenheit is really, really deadly to a hermit crab. So even a day or two in those temperatures could be could lead to a really bad situation, and I would probably make the decision to dig them up and evacuate much quicker than for me where I'm in a hurricane in a tropical environment. The best thing that you can do in an emergency is have a plan, follow the plan, and stay calm. Hopefully, you will absolutely never need to use this talk, but as I always say, it's best to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So if you did need this talk, I hope it was helpful, and I hope it also inspired you to create a disaster kit and make sure that you and your crabs are ready in the case a disaster unexpectedly strikes. Thank you so much for watching my talk, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of CrabCon 2023. Bye guys.